was released in January 97, and then HTML4 was released in December of 97. Officially, though, 4.01 was recommended in December 99, fixing a few bugs found in the HTML4 spec. At that time, things were going great. People were creating content with HTML4 using CSS. You know, the web world was looking pretty good. At the same time, XML was just exploding, and the World Wide Web Consortium says, hey, we're going to control those standards as well, you know, and sure enough, they did. And Microsoft at the same time was dealing with their DNA, and they were ultimately working on their My Services and web services, and .NET was going to be coming out. .NET came out in 2002, and XML was going to be the language to use to pass data between two different computer systems. XML really did explode. I mean, it has the power to be raw text so a human can read it and change it. We can pass it between any two computers running any type of software and any type of platform. And because XML was so powerful, added to the spec was XHTML. XHTML is basically the same thing as your HTML with your same tags and markup, but we treat it like a well-formed XML document. Well-formed, meaning we have opening tags and matching closing tags. We're case-sensitive with our tags. Our attributes have quotes around the values. We adhere to all of these different rules. Plus, we would follow a schema file that was defined, a DTD file we would declare at the very top of our XHTML document. A lot of the editors out there as well, the tools that we would use for creating web pages would support XHTML. Fantastic, you know, so we'd go ahead and support these, and this would only ensure that we had stronger web pages and it was better developed, if you will. The World Wide Web Consortium loved XML so much that they said, well, we've got XHTML 1.0 and XHTML 1.1. Let's go with XHTML 2.0. So they continued to work on 2.0 with a separate group who was defining the standard, and they were waiting and waiting and waiting. And this was time that was lost forever, waiting for the XHTML 2.0 standard to come through. When it was coming through, it turns out they were breaking the specifications of HTML4. They were not being reverse compatible. And that was a problem, okay? As it states right up here in the title, XHTML2 sucks. It did. It was a bad design. It was breaking pages that were created in HTML4. So a lot of people were upset about this, including people from different browser vendors, such as Opera and Apple and Google. And they actually got together, especially the Opera group. They said, you know what, let's create our own HTML5 forms. We're going to call it Web Forms 2.0. And in Web Forms 2.0, we'll define our own custom tags and our own custom attributes. That's really was the start of HTML5. Even though XHTML2 was coming out, they decided, no, we actually want to have our own set of tags, and even formed their own group. The group was called the Web Hypertext Application Technology Working Group, and it was led by a gentleman over at Opera named Ian Hickson. He no longer works at Opera now. He works over at Google, but he actually worked at Opera at the time, and they helped develop some basic tags so they can include the current tags in HTML4 and bring them over to the HTML5 world. And so they came up with Web Forms 2.0. Sounds great. Then they even went ahead and published these standards out on the web saying this is really what HTML5 should be. And they called it that on their website. They said this is the new HTML5 standards, ignoring the W3C group altogether. Well, the WCC group continued to work on XHTML2, but then realized that what WG was getting a lot more favoritism because they had a better design and they were not breaking everybody's web pages. Plus, turns out a lot of web pages were still being developed in HTML4 that were not XHTML compliant. I know some of the pages I've created, I've always tried to adhere to XHTML standards, but a lot of developers did not internationally. And because of that, HTML5 is what we call paving the cow paths. The cow paths, meaning the fact that most of the web pages out there today are still not case sensitive, still don't have quotes on their values and their attributes all the time, may not have closing tags. HTML5 should continue that practice and not break any of those standards. Instead, HTML5 should just carry forward new tags. Literally, in the W3C documentation, you'll find that term, or that slogan, of paving the cow paths, meaning this is where everybody's going. I guess we have to accept it and make it part of the standard. They even grabbed the latest standards from the WhatWG's group, and they said, hey, this is the new HTML5 standard, because they wanted to reclaim control. And this was, they were somewhat bitter about that. They lost control of their standards. They published them, and the W3C just took them. And they said, well, okay, fine. You want to control the standards? That's fine. Well, we're going to be a living group that's always going to be working on the cutting edge of the future. So they've decided that to drop the number 5 from their entire site and say they have the HTML standards, and they are a very open group, willing to welcome anyone who wants to participate, help redefine what's going to be in the next version of HTML. So they like to think of it as being a playground of sorts that allows people to go ahead and make changes to the HTML standards. And, of course, they can still submit those to the World Wide Web Consortium. XHTML5 is cool, though. I told you XHTML2 wasn't so good, and it never took off because it included things such as XForms, which were, again, breaking the standards. XHTML5 is not a full XHTML way of programming. You might want to think of it as a choice of a developer to follow XHTML standards. You see, before we used to have this giant schema mentioned at the top with this humongously long DTD file mentioned at the top, the design document that would actually specify the schema we would adhere to with XHTML. But now with XHTML5, you're basically saying that your HTML5 document is going to be a well-formed XML document. You're not really going to follow a schema at all, and you're not even going to reference one at the top. You're just committing to anybody who happens to look at the page that, hey, I'm following XHTML5 standards. Nowhere in the actual page itself will it say that you're using XHTML. This is just a mindset, if you will, where like you are the developer, you're going to follow XHTML standards because you prefer it, and then today's editors can, of course, help you with that, making sure you adhere to XHTML standards. But know that the browser isn't really going to care one way or another. The browser is going to say, this is HTML5 tags. That's all I care. They can be uppercase, lowercase, mixed case. You don't have to have closing tags and all kinds of stuff. It's going to be more of a mindset now. So here's our 30 new tags. These are 30 different tags. I put them down here in alphabetical order. I mean, what other order could I put them in? I suppose I could have put them in more of a related order, but I thought it'd be interesting just to put them in alphabetical order. And we're going to see how we use some of these things for actually defining new sections within our document. Like, for example, there's a header, there's a footer, there's a nav, there's an aside, there's an article and section. These are all basic elements that are intended to contain content, like the div tag. Other tags that we have, like, for example, we have the data list control, is actually meant to hold on to a collection of data that can be used by one of the input tags. We've also got things such as the canvas tag, which is used, of course, for drawing graphics. And we've got the meter tag. The meter works very similar to the progress tag. The meter tag can be used to inform the user what the current status of something running is, as well as the progress can do that as well. The meter is actually something that can be adjustable from the user as well, like they'd like to turn something up or down, whereas progress generally is meant to be something that displays the current progress of a task running. We've got audio and video tags for displaying running audio files or displaying video files. Those are just some of the other controls that we have. The new APIs. Admittedly, this is the only slide I have which talks about the APIs. So let me go through these, okay? Websockets, first things first. Websockets is one of the APIs that they decided to go ahead and throw it into the HTML5 spec, or title, I should say. WebSockets allows your web applications from a browser standpoint, to be able to communicate and maintain a connection with your server. So long as you set up an application on the server to run and monitor ports, if you will, the client can easily connect to it, and you can have a live conversation with the server. No more of this silly request, response, disconnect business. You can actually open up a connection and keep it open and communicate back and forth between the client and the server with WebSockets. It's meant to be as simple as possible to write in JavaScript on the client side. You just got to get the server side up and running. Web workers is interesting as well. With web workers, you can actually launch separate windows or separate browser threads to go ahead and run different JavaScript files. And once a parent thread, for example, launches a child thread to go run a separate JS file, they can communicate back and forth by calling methods off of each other, passing data back and forth. They've even got these things called shared web workers. Shared web workers might be a child thread that's shared by two parent threads, and they can communicate with both parents or more parents. So we have a couple different forms of web workers where we'll just define some methods and we can pass data back and forth. Either way, this also means that multiple JavaScript files can run simultaneously for higher performance.